Quiet, everybody. It's Michael Sean. Second episode of the Free Range Texan is about to begin. But before we get underway, I just wanted to give you a little heads up. Today's Free Range Texan podcast is sponsored by the folks at A-Team PR. There's not time right now for me to tell you all the stuff that they do, but one of the things that they do is produce this podcast. I'll have time to mention all that later in the show, but for now, I guess you better keep it under your hat. Under your hat. That's something we say here in Texas. Buckle up, we're fixin' to start.
7.
Start the clock.
6.
Stand by, Eddie Bay 1.
5.
Stand by, Sweetie Pie.
4.
Bring studio mics hot.
3.
Stand by, Michael Sean.
2.
Roll music.
1.
Well, howdy, y'all. The Free Range Texan podcast is underway. This here program is a special look at the way life is shaping up for folks in the U.S. of A., seen through the eyes of a born and bred West Texan. Our host is a veteran broadcaster who is known for his campfire visits on radio. Michael Sean is standing by.
Stand by, Michael Sean.
So here he is, our host, a real Free Range Texan himself, Michael Sean.
Well, hello, everyone. From deep in the heart of Texas. Literally podcasting over the wall and far beyond. You might say parts of Texas are a gated community. That's enough with the inside humor, I guess. Hey, welcome to the Free Range Texan, everybody. This show is not made in New York City. The Free Range Texan crew has outdone themselves. What a show we got coming up for you. I could not believe the preliminary notes that they sent over for me to get ready for today's show. For instance, we have television and movie star Tom Selleck going to be on the show. Excuse me, just a minute there. The control booth is, I got a little message here in my ear. Oh, Tom Selleck is not going to be on the show today. I told you to call Tom Selleck. Uh-huh. Well, apparently, Mr. Selleck has not returned our call. So do we have a plan B? What? I beg your pardon? I am being told that today we're going to interview me. No, I'm serious. Now, I've got some stories I'd love to tell. I probably shouldn't, but seriously, though, we're going to do a special segment on today's Free Range Texan about what the heck has happened to broadcast radio in the United States.
Not quite dead yet.
That's all coming up. We got more information about life inside my favorite state, and it's not Rhode Island. And like always, we'll be going to the campfire, you and I. Michael Sean's campfire is being stoked as we speak. And, of course, the regulars on the show, the crystal clear Rio Grande mariachis are over setting up in the corner of the studio as we speak. Hoo-ha, boys! The Free Range Texan is rolling out for episode number 2. We're about to get underway.
today's news, Private Presley departed Fort Hood, Texas for Bremerhaven, Germany for an 18-month tour of duty. Thousands of American teenage girls are left heartbroken, but German fans are sure to embrace Presley. According to the Star, should rock and roll music die out during his service, he would leave singing and focus on his acting career.
So it's a burning question. What has happened to broadcast radio in the United States over the last 10, 15, 20 years? With your permission, I'm going to give you a rare look from the inside of the industry. Remember when radio was live and local broadcasters who lived and worked in the same town that you did? They drove the same streets, they ate at the same restaurants, and attended the same church. The term local celebrity was used because everybody in the county knew your name. Radio was fun to listen to. And in the 80s, and more so in the 90s, more and more radio stations began to be bought out by larger and larger corporations that collectively programmed a larger and larger share of the markets in the United States, and likewise controlling the programming on, eventually, most of the local stations. By and large, local broadcast stations no longer owned by broadcasters. Computers were found to be ultimately less expensive and perhaps more reliable than live personalities. From a corporate standpoint, recorded announcer breaks could fool the listener into thinking the show was live. After all, after a few years, nobody remembered the difference. You could own hundreds of radio stations, and they would all sound alike, because programming decisions ultimately were tightly controlled by business bottom lines and a person or persons who don't have a clue what life is really like in your town. And while it's true that nowadays there's so many other options like cable and satellite and online listening and YouTube and, well, the list goes on, including podcasts. The truth is, a smart and talented broadcaster should be showman enough to think on his or her feet and utilize all the new technologies. Radio broadcast stations have begun to win smaller and smaller shares of the market. The same thing happened to newspapers. Remember, when you paid more and got less in the way of people seeing your message than ever before. Playing back-to-back music, homogenized programming, music sweeps. That's what everybody is doing now. Because the truth is, they have by and large forgotten how to do anything else. Computers have no personality. And don't even get me started on today's hit music or what they label as country and western. Stations are being run so lean now that they no longer choose to afford air personalities. The solutions are not simple, but for radio to not only survive but thrive once again, it's going to have to be once again owned and run by people of polish who love broadcasting. Podcasting flies in the face of all of that, but we'll talk about that in a moment. But first, there's a real heart-to-heart meeting that I want to share with you that I was privileged to attend. The decision to produce the Free Range Texan podcast was kicked around for a number of months before it became real. Decisions were being made in a certain meeting about spending A-Team PR's limited time and production funds on less broadcast syndication, i.e. radio, and instead began to focus efforts on the worldwide podcast market. Numbers were being kicked about. Here's some things that I shared, because at a production studio meeting, they record everything. You guys hear? All right, listen very carefully to what I'm telling you. Look, it's Edison Research. They've got a clear statement on here. It says podcast listeners defined as those who reported listening to podcasts in the last 24 hours consuming audio. Now this graph, and I'm fixing to show, I'm going to pass this around, I'm going to show you this graph. This graph represents the share of time podcast listeners spend each day based on a national representative sample of 2,021 Americans across the United States who completed a 24-hour audio listening diary. The numbers are larger in the podcast arena now than what I'm fixing to show you. The segment that listened to owned music, CDs, and digital music files, 23%. Streaming audio, Pandora, Spotify, etc., 12%. TV music channels, 9%. Sirius XM radio, 5%. AM and FM radio combined, 21%. And podcasts, the largest piece of the pie, and this was 4 years ago, was at 30%. And I promise you, it's grown from there. And it was shortly after that the idea of producing a podcast known as Free Range Texan became a serious matter for the folks at 18PR. Oh, well, so much for inside stuff. We won't do that very often, but we wanted to give it to you today. Besides, Tom Selleck didn't return our call. There is no business like show business, y'all. Free Range Texan podcast promised you that I would talk about some of Michael Sean's favorite things about his favorite place. I know a lot of you are thinking, maybe that's Michigan. Also, later on in the show today, we got Michael Sean's Campfire. Well, if you haven't guessed it by now, old Michael Sean is unashamedly a Texan. And like all Texans, I find myself continually fighting the urge to become a bit braggadocious about my Texican roots. Texas is a very special place. It's the only state in America that was an independent, self-governed republic before we chose to annex the United States. It's the largest state in the Union in terms of privately held, non-government land. I don't want to give you the impression that all Texans have a lot of money, because they don't. And a lot of Texans that once had money are now so broke the banks won't let them draw breath. But I'd say to you that a lot of Texas friends of mine are rich in other ways. A place where the sunsets are out of this world and the summer moon is bigger, brighter, and more just downright romantic than anywhere else on earth. We have the Alamo, San Jacinto, and the beautiful hill country, Spanish Missions, Palo Duro Canyon, Big Bend National Park, the Gulf Coast, and the Piney Woods, plus some of the best hunting, fishing, and football found anywhere in the country. Exotic foods, both kinds of music, country and western, wide open spaces, and more festivals than you can shake a stick at. About the only thing Texas doesn't have is a lot of snow. If you're a skier, then you could have a problem, because if God intended Texans to snow ski, he would have made manure white. Now, for you folks up north, the next time you spend half a day shoveling snow off your driveway, you may catch yourself thinking about Texas. We do water ski since Texas has more lakes than Minnesota, which bills itself as the land of 1,000 lakes. I don't want you to start thinking Texas is a land of milk and honey, because that's not true. We do have some serious problems. Sometimes it's weather. Sometimes it's an overabundance of chicken fried steaks and white cream gravy. Or it might just be Yankees moving in. Well, if the weather's too hot, for goodness sakes, everything is air conditioned, so the heat shouldn't bother you unless you're silly enough to get out in it. And in the winter, for those parts of Texas that it occasionally gets somewhat chilly, you'll find that Texans have discovered fire, electricity, down jackets, long-handle underwear, and furnaces. So there's hardly even ever any case of the entire family freezing to death. And I'll admit that the wind in some parts of Texas blows quite a bit, often kicking up some dust. Why, one time in Lubbock, the dust was blowing so hard that I actually saw a jackrabbit digging a hole about 6 feet off the ground. And for those northerners, well, our state motto is friendship. When you see a Texan and they tip their hat to you, say howdy. Just know that they really mean it. So stand up and remove your hat when you hear the eyes of Texas are upon you. Have you tried to hire vocal talent from a studio capable of delivering the polished, professional sound for corporate presentations, commercials, or even phone answering systems? It can be a little bit pricey. A-Team PR is probably who you're looking for. Producing broadcast quality products with talented vocal artists that produce in a creative digital environment. Located in Texas, not a union shop. What that means is less overhead with the production talent and quality that you're looking for. Thinking about producing your own radio syndicated show or podcast? Let A-Team PR provide the production and post-edit support that you may need. Now, you can take my word for it because, after all, among other things, A-Team PR produces this podcast. Or see for yourself. Find out more about A-Team PR on our website at freerangetexan.net. Oh, yes, and tell them Michael sent you. Hi, this is Michael Shawn, and welcome to the Campfire. Fenwick Mercer was a reader of Western stories, a dreamer of wide and far lands. He'd come all the way from Boston to find his way to the western prairie plains. As it turned out, for 9 years of his quest, he had been a saddle tramp, moving from town to town, ranch to ranch, herd to herd, seeking his place in America's heartland. At the start, he might have been meek and mild, a bit lost under the wide skies and open plains, the legends unfolding all around him in one fashion or another. Fenwick Mercer was a good student and learned quickly. He had encountered Indians, rustlers, card sharks, drunken gunslingers, all of the in-betweeners. The sky was the highest, mountains the biggest, and the nights were the loneliest. Somewhere in the middle of it all, Eden surely flourished. Utopia spread its arms. Fenwick's life seemed to be about bullets, beef, hardtack, dusty herds, dry lands crying out for water, and hard rides between jobs. Most of his saddle partners called him just plain Finn. When one day he heard about the Finns, He had ridden into Bola City. It was the Finn name that grabbed him right up out of the saddle. The widow Finn. Her husband had been the sheriff, and one night a stray bullet from a crooked card game found him. Annabelle Finn, as it turned out, needed a man to handle her small spread. Rancher, rider, she began to spread the word. Annabelle was a beautiful woman and most practical, she said. I'll need a new husband. She did laundry, waitressing, odd jobs for folks who could afford it, and kept her eyes open for a new man who would surely come into her life. The first time Annabelle saw Fenwick Mercer, interest was not sparked in her. Annabelle's friends told her, he ain't Mr. Handsome, Annabelle. But Mr. Handsome ain't about to come to Bola City. She found Finn's looks acceptable, his manners polite, his clothes for the moment clean, and his eyes full of a secret or two back down the trail. She looked at him directly in the eyes. They were blue and clear. At that exact moment, shots rang out from the Bola City bank. Glass shattered. People in the street screamed. More shots. Finn Mercer just about tackled Annabelle Finn, ending up lying across her body. He had covered her completely. His eyes, she found, were still blue. Thank you, Mr. Mercer. Welcome aboard. She kissed him and said, when this is all over and the robbers are caught, when the posse comes back, if there is a posse, I've got me a new husband, if you're willing. She kissed him again. And that's the day that Fenwick Mercer understood his long, hard ride from Boston. He knew he had found Eden. He knew he had found Utopia. I'm Michael Shawn. Another great campfire story. I'll see you next time. Adios, my friends. Just a quick reminder, this podcast is sponsored by A-Team PR. If you want to know more about the creative crew at A-Team PR, go to our website at freerangetexan.net. Also, the charts and graphs we mentioned from Edison Research on the show are all posted there at freerangetexan.net.
Y'all been listening to the Free Range Texan podcast with worldwide members of the herd writing in each week. If you'd like more information about our show or where to find the products we talked about on Free Range Texan, visit our website at freerangetexan.net. That's freerangetexan.net. Free Range Texan is produced out yonder at A-Team PR Studios. Speaking for Michael Shawn and the rest of our crew, this is Sweetie Pie, and we'll see you next time on the Free Range Texan podcast.